There was a moment in history when the sound of civilization itself began to change. The streets still looked normal. Markets still opened at sunrise. Officials still wore their uniforms, and citizens still followed routines repeated for generations. But beneath the surface, something invisible had started to fracture. The laws that once held entire cities together were slowly losing their weight. People no longer trusted the institutions built to protect them. Small crimes stopped being punished. Minor corruption became expected. Violence no longer shocked the population the way it once had. And in the silence between ordinary days, public order began to weaken. No alarms announced its arrival. No single event warned the population that the structure around them was already failing. Because collapse rarely begins with explosions or revolutions. It begins quietly, hidden inside routines that still appear normal. And by the time the signs become impossible to ignore, fear has already replaced stability in the minds of millions. In the later centuries of the Roman Empire, cities that once represented the height of organization and authority slowly descended into uncertainty. Rome had built roads that connected continents, laws that shaped civilizations, and armies feared across the known world. For centuries, public order had been maintained through discipline, administration, and the overwhelming presence of state power. Citizens believed the empire was eternal because they had never known a world without it. But deep inside the system, pressure had been accumulating for generations. Inflation weakened the economy. Corruption spread through local governments. Soldiers loyal to money replaced soldiers loyal to the state. The empire still looked powerful from the outside, yet ordinary people had already begun to notice changes in daily life. Taxes increased, while protection disappeared. Trade routes became dangerous. Travelers vanished along roads once considered safe. And slowly, the idea that the government could control events started to disappear from the public imagination. In many regions, the collapse did not begin with invading armies. It began with something far more subtle: the disappearance of predictability. Farmers no longer knew if their harvests would survive theft before reaching the markets. Merchants hired private guards because local authorities could no longer guarantee safety. Wealthy families fortified their homes while poorer citizens abandoned entire neighborhoods after sunset. The social contract that held society together started to dissolve piece by piece. Public trust faded long before governments officially collapsed. But no one understood what was coming next. Most people believed the instability was temporary, another difficult period that stronger leadership would eventually solve. History shows this pattern repeatedly. Humans are slow to recognize systemic failure while they are still living inside it. Even as disorder expands, routines continue. Children still play in the streets. Vendors still open shops. Leaders still deliver speeches promising control over situations already slipping beyond their reach. During the final decades before many historical collapses, authorities often became obsessed with preserving appearances rather than solving structural problems. Public ceremonies continued, while food shortages spread. Political leaders blamed outsiders, minorities, or foreign enemies for crises created internally over decades. In the late Roman world, local militias emerged because citizens no longer trusted imperial protection. Similar patterns appeared centuries later, during the decline of dynasties, collapsing republics, and industrial societies under severe stress. Public order does not disappear all at once. It fragments unevenly. One district remains peaceful while another descends into violence. One city maintains stability, while neighboring regions become ungovernable. This gradual fragmentation creates dangerous illusions. Many people convince themselves the crisis is distant because their own routines still function. But by the time instability reaches the center of society, the mechanisms capable of stopping it are already exhausted. The French Revolution revealed another terrifying dimension of collapsing public order. Before the violence erupted openly, daily life in Paris had already become tense with invisible pressure. Bread shortages increased desperation among ordinary citizens, while distrust toward the monarchy spread through every level of society. Rumors moved faster than official information. Crowds gathered more frequently. Anger became part of the atmosphere itself. Yet even then, many aristocrats believed the unrest could still be controlled through familiar political rituals. They underestimated how quickly fear can transform populations once confidence in authority disappears. When institutions lose legitimacy, even small incidents can trigger uncontrollable reactions. A single confrontation becomes a riot, a rumor becomes panic, a protest becomes revolution. And once the public begins to believe the system no longer protects them equally, the psychological foundation of order starts collapsing faster than any army can contain. In the streets of revolutionary Paris, the soundscape of the city changed completely. Church bells that once marked routine became signals of alarm. Crowds moved through narrow streets carrying weapons taken from abandoned armories. Public executions transformed into spectacles watched by thousands. Suspicion infected neighbors, families, and entire communities. The collapse of public order created a reality where survival depended less on law and more on shifting loyalties and fear. But no one understood how irreversible the transformation had become. Many still believed normal life would eventually return. Instead, instability fed upon itself. As trust disappeared, violence became both political and personal. Ordinary disagreements turned deadly because there was no longer a universally respected authority capable of controlling escalation. The institutions that once stabilized society had lost both power and credibility. And when legitimacy disappears, fear quickly becomes the strongest governing force inside a collapsing civilization. Centuries later, similar patterns emerged during the collapse of Imperial Russia. Before the revolutions of 1917, the empire still appeared enormous and powerful from the outside. Railways operated, factories produced goods, soldiers marched beneath imperial banners. Yet beneath the surface, exhaustion consumed the nation. War had drained resources, inflation devastated workers, and food shortages created growing panic in major cities. Public order began failing not because citizens suddenly rejected the system overnight, but because daily survival itself became uncertain. Bread lines stretched for hours, workers abandoned factories to search for food, police forces became overwhelmed by demonstrations they could no longer control. The government continued issuing commands, but commands mean little once institutions lose the ability to enforce them consistently. And by the time leaders realized how deeply authority had eroded, crowds already controlled the streets. One of the most dangerous moments in any societal collapse occurs when ordinary citizens realize rules are no longer reliably enforced. History repeatedly shows that behavior changes rapidly once populations perceive weakness inside systems of authority. Looting increases, organized crime expands, armed groups emerge claiming to provide protection where governments cannot. During the collapse of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, neighborhoods that had coexisted peacefully for decades transformed almost overnight after institutions fragmented under political and ethnic tension. Friends became suspicious of each other. Families fled cities they once considered permanent homes. Public order vanished unevenly but relentlessly. And the most haunting reality was how quickly ordinary life adapted to instability. They memorized dangerous streets, avoided certain checkpoints, and stopped trusting official information entirely. Civilization continued physically, but psychologically, society had already entered a state of collapse. The collapse of public order often reveals how fragile modern life truly is. Most civilizations depend on invisible systems functioning continuously. Transportation, policing, food distribution, communication, electricity, trust. When these systems weaken simultaneously, even advanced societies become vulnerable with terrifying speed. During major blackouts, natural disasters, or wartime evacuations, historians and sociologists repeatedly observe the same phenomenon. At first, people wait calmly, believing authorities will restore control quickly. But as uncertainty grows, fear spreads faster than facts. Shelves empty, rumors multiply, crowds become unpredictable. Individuals begin prioritizing personal survival over collective stability. The collapse does not begin with savagery, it begins with uncertainty. Human beings can tolerate hardship remarkably well when systems remain predictable. What destroys public order is the sudden realization that no one is truly in control anymore. In ancient cities abandoned after economic collapse or plague, archaeologists often discover evidence of routines interrupted mid-motion. Workshops left unfinished, coins scattered inside homes, tools abandoned where workers once stood. These silent remnants reveal something profound about societal breakdown. Most people living through collapse do not fully recognize it while it is happening. Life continues one day at a time, even as the surrounding system deteriorates irreversibly. During the Black Death in medieval Europe, entire regions watched institutions fail simultaneously under the pressure of mass death. Clergy abandoned churches, officials fled cities, trade networks collapsed, fear replaced social trust at every level of society. And in many places, public order dissolved not because people became inherently violent, but because the structures that organized reality itself could no longer function under catastrophic pressure. Yet some of the most dangerous collapses in history occurred not through sudden catastrophe, but through gradual normalization of dysfunction. Citizens adapt slowly to worsening conditions, corruption becomes expected, violence becomes routine, distrust becomes cultural. Entire generations grow up inside systems already weakened, believing instability is normal because they have never experienced true institutional confidence. This process appeared during the final decades of many declining empires and fragile republics. Leaders focused on maintaining short-term control while deeper structural problems expanded unchecked. Public order survived superficially, but internally, the system was hollow. Then eventually, a crisis arrived that the weakened structure could no longer absorb. Sometimes it was war, sometimes famine, sometimes financial collapse. The trigger varied across history, but the outcome remained terrifyingly similar. Once confidence disappears collectively, restoring order becomes exponentially harder than maintaining it in the first place. Modern societies often imagine themselves immune to the patterns that destroyed civilizations in the past. Technology creates the illusion of permanence. Surveillance systems, digital networks, and advanced institutions appear stronger than anything previous empires possessed. Yet historians consistently warn that collapse rarely announces itself clearly in advance. Public order begins failing long before governments officially acknowledge the scale of the crisis. Trust erodes silently through polarization, inequality, institutional fatigue, and constant uncertainty. People retreat into smaller groups, smaller loyalties, smaller definitions of community. And as shared trust weakens, the ability of society to respond collectively weakens alongside it. The collapse does not begin with burning buildings. It begins inside the human mind, the moment citizens stop believing the system protects everyone equally. Because once enough people lose faith in public order, fear itself starts reshaping society faster than laws ever could. History leaves behind ruins, documents, and mass graves, but perhaps the most disturbing lesson repeated across collapsing civilizations is this: public order is far more fragile than most societies are willing to admit. Entire populations once believed their systems were permanent. Their governments looked stable, their institutions appeared eternal, their citizens trusted routines that had existed for generations. Then slowly, almost invisibly, those routines stopped functioning. The collapse did not arrive as a single dramatic moment. It arrived through accumulated distrust, exhausted institutions, normalized instability, and fear spreading silently through ordinary life. And by the time people understood the scale of what was happening around them, the world they once recognized no longer existed. Because civilization is not held together only by laws or armies, it survives through collective belief. And when that belief finally begins to fracture, history shows that even the strongest societies can descend into darkness far faster than anyone imagines.